There are wars that rage quietly, without swords or banners. They are fought not in deserts or cathedrals, but in the secret country of the heart. And the soldiers, they are those who dare to fast. We think of fasting as hunger, as denial, as an ancient religious inconvenience. But it is something far more dangerous, far more glorious. It is a rebellion. For when a soul chooses to hunger, it tells the flesh, "You are not my master." And in that single act of rebellion, demons tremble. Let me speak of 4 fasting methods, each a key forged in heaven, each capable of locking hell's doors so they do not reopen. Before a man ever pushes away a plate or closes his lips in hunger, something far greater has already begun. The true fast begins in the unseen corridors of the soul, where appetite, pride, and longing dwell side by side. The first battle is not with bread, but with self. The body is merely the battlefield, the spirit is the warrior, and the enemy is the ancient whisper that says, "You deserve this." To fast rightly, one must understand that hunger is only the echo of a deeper conflict. The conflict between the spirit that longs for God and the flesh that clings to comfort. It is easy to think of demons as creatures lurking outside of us, prowling in shadows, waiting for weakness. Yet far more often they are found in the unexamined corners of our own desires. They wear familiar faces: impatience, vanity, resentment, self-pity. These are not intruders breaking into the soul. They are squatters who have been allowed to stay too long. Fasting begins when the soul serves them an eviction notice. In the stillness of fasting, when the noise of pleasure and distraction is silenced, one begins to hear the small, secret arguments of the heart. It is there that the war within becomes visible. The mind begins to reveal its attachments, how it needs approval, how it fears loss, how it chases indulgence to escape loneliness. The stomach may growl, but it is the heart that confesses. The fast turns the inner life into a mirror, and in that reflection, the soul meets both its weakness and its calling. To abstain from food is to withdraw strength from the body, but to give strength to the spirit. Every pang of hunger becomes a summons, a reminder that man was never meant to live by bread alone. The one who fasts steps out of the habitual rhythm of indulgence and dares to confront the machinery of his own desires. This is not an act of cruelty to the body, but an act of mercy to the soul. The flesh cries out for satisfaction. The spirit answers, "Not yet." And in that small refusal lies the beginning of dominion. Demons do not fear the weak or the wounded. They fear the awakened. They fear the soul that knows its own divided nature and has chosen its allegiance. For fasting is not merely deprivation, it is declaration. It declares that one's hunger will no longer be governed by impulse, that one's comfort will no longer dictate one's worship. It draws a line that cannot be crossed, a sacred boundary where the self must bow before the divine. There is an old truth hidden beneath the simplicity of fasting, that the greatest tyrants are not outside of us, but within. The craving for praise, the addiction to distraction, the constant need to be filled, these are the chains that fasting seeks to shatter. When the stomach is emptied, it becomes a symbol of the emptied self, a vessel waiting to be filled not with indulgence but with presence. And where presence abides, darkness cannot endure. The war within is subtle, and its victories are silent. There is no applause for resisting temptation, no crown for saying no to desire. Yet the one who endures the fast wages a war of immense consequence. He learns that the fiercest demons do not flee at noise or ritual, but at obedience. When the soul chooses surrender over satisfaction, when it endures hunger as an offering instead of a punishment, the very order of creation is restored within him. The spirit reclaims its throne, the flesh becomes its servant once more. To begin such a fast is to enter the wilderness where every soul must walk alone with its Maker. The wilderness is not a place of absence, but of revelation. There, stripped of comfort, the soul discovers what truly sustains it. It begins to see that every appetite, every craving, is a signpost pointing either toward bondage or freedom. And only through hunger does one learn which is which. In the early hours of fasting, the battle is noisy, the stomach protests, the mind complains, the will trembles. But as the days pass and the spirit steadies, a strange peace begins to rise. The silence that once felt empty becomes alive with meaning. The hunger that once felt unbearable becomes a teacher. Each moment of restraint becomes an act of worship, a whisper of defiance against the tyranny of self. In this war within, the victory is not the absence of hunger, but the mastery of it. To hunger and yet rejoice, to lack and yet trust. This is the secret power that fasting unveils. For when the soul no longer fears deprivation, the demons lose their strongest weapon, temptation. They cannot lure the one who has found strength in surrender. The war within is where every great deliverance begins. It is the quiet revolution of the spirit, the holy rebellion that topples every false ruler within the heart. And though it begins with something as small as a skipped meal, its echoes reach eternity. There is a great confusion that lives in the minds of many, that fasting is a kind of punishment, a cruel denial of what the body needs. Yet fasting, when rightly understood, is not starvation. It is the deliberate quieting of the body's endless chatter so that the soul may finally be heard. The flesh speaks loudly, it is always speaking. It speaks in cravings, in habits, in comfort, in fear of discomfort. It demands its small luxuries with a voice so constant that it drowns out the whisper of heaven. Fasting, then, is not about deprivation. It is about discipline of attention. It is the art of tuning one's ear to a higher frequency, one that the noise of appetite has long obscured. The body, left unchecked, becomes a restless master. It feeds on routine and grows drunk on satisfaction. It is not evil, but it is noisy, so noisy that its hunger, its fatigue, its pleasure, and its pain begin to define our sense of reality. Yet man was not made to be governed by sensation alone. He was made to live as a union of dust and breath, body and spirit intertwined, each in its proper order. When the flesh grows too loud, it must be silenced, not by violence but by reverence. To silence the flesh is to remind it that it is an instrument, not a ruler, a servant, not a king. When one fasts, the ordinary symphony of comfort begins to fade. The taste of food, the rhythm of indulgence, the soft weight of satisfaction, all retreat into the background. What remains is the bare, unfiltered sound of the heart. At first, this silence feels harsh, even unbearable. The body complains like a spoiled child denied its treat. But slowly, as the hours pass, a new sound emerges. The still, steady pulse of the spirit waking from its long slumber. It speaks not in words, but in awareness, in clarity, in conviction, in peace. True fasting, then, is a conversation between the silent body and the speaking soul. The more the body quiets, the clearer the spirit becomes. It is as though the mind, long clouded by the fog of constant consumption, begins to see again. Desires are revealed for what they are, fleeting shadows, not masters of fate. The fast turns noise into stillness and stillness into revelation. In that sacred quiet, one begins to sense truths that ordinary living keeps hidden. The subtle pride behind pleasure, the fear behind comfort, the idolatry behind convenience. To silence the flesh is to awaken discernment. Every hunger becomes symbolic, every craving a question. Why do I need this? What am I feeding? These questions pierce through illusion like shafts of light in a dim room. The flesh demands satisfaction, but the spirit demands meaning. Between these two demands, fasting stands as judge, forcing the soul to choose what kind of fullness it seeks. For man cannot serve two hungers at once. He must decide whether he will feed his body or his being. It is a humbling thing to realize how much noise we carry within ourselves. The body's desires are not limited to food. They appear in the need to be seen, to be approved, to be comforted by the familiar. When one fasts, these hidden dependencies rise to the surface. One sees how easily the flesh disguises itself as necessity. It says, you need this to live, when in truth it means, you need this to avoid hearing your emptiness. Fasting tears away such disguises. It leaves the soul exposed before its Maker, unclothed of excuses. This silence of flesh is not merely physical, it reaches into thought, speech, and action. When the body grows quiet, so too must the mind. The incessant inner commentary, the judgments, the complaints, all must fall into the same holy hush. For the spirit cannot be heard in a storm of noise. The one who fasts learns that silence is not emptiness but presence, not absence but attention. In stillness, he begins to hear not only the voice of the divine, but also the hidden motives of his own heart. The world fears silence because silence reveals truth. To still the body is to make room for that revelation. The modern soul lives surrounded by noise, constant movement, constant consumption, constant distraction. Fasting stands as rebellion against this tyranny of noise. It says, be still. It refuses to let the body dictate the terms of peace. And as the body quiets, its power weakens, the spirit, long overshadowed, begins to rise. It is in this rising that transformation occurs. The one who learns to silence his flesh learns to command it. He becomes free not by having all he desires, but by no longer being enslaved to desire itself. In that inner stillness, he finds a new kind of strength, the strength that comes from being governed by purpose instead of pleasure, by spirit instead of sensation. And though the flesh may protest and the stomach may ache, something infinitely greater begins to unfold within him. A clarity untouched by hunger, a peace unshaken by need, and a voice that speaks with the quiet authority of eternity. 4 doors of deliverance, the 4 methods, abstinence fast, Daniel fast, watchman's fast, and the hidden fast. There are moments in a person's spiritual journey when discipline must become a weapon and devotion must take form. Fasting is that form, a structured rebellion against the tyranny of the flesh and the whisper of unseen forces that feed upon human weakness. Yet fasting is not one shape but many, not one road but 4. Each path is a door that opens into deeper freedom, a distinct mode of warfare against the subtle darkness that attaches itself to appetite, routine, and complacency. These are the 4 doors of deliverance: the abstinence fast, the Daniel fast, the watchman's fast, and the hidden fast. Each carries a different flame, and when combined, they burn away what no ordinary prayer can touch. The abstinence fast is the first and most accessible of these doors. It is the training ground where the soul learns restraint. It is not a total withdrawal from nourishment, but a chosen simplicity, a refusal to indulge in what is lawful but unnecessary. One might abstain from certain foods, entertainments, or habits that have grown too loud in the soul. It is here that the will is strengthened, for the abstinence fast teaches mastery rather than misery. Every deliberate no becomes an act of worship, a quiet statement that the flesh is not in command. Demons do not thrive in disciplined hearts. They require indulgence to survive. The abstinence fast denies them their sustenance. It sharpens the edge of awareness, allowing the one who fasts to see temptation coming long before it strikes. Beyond this first door lies the Daniel fast, a fast of purity and purpose. It draws its name from a man who, in the midst of Babylon's abundance, refused the king's delicacies and chose simplicity and loyalty to his God. This fast is a cleansing, a restoration of the inner temple. It calls the body to purity and the mind to focus. While the abstinence fast trains discipline, the Daniel fast sanctifies desire. It is not merely the avoidance of rich foods, but the purification of what enters both mouth and mind. In this fast, one learns that holiness is not abstention for its own sake, but alignment with what is true. Babylon, in every age, invites the soul to compromise, to consume what numbs, to accept what defiles quietly. The Daniel fast is the defiance of such compromise. It is saying, I will not dine with the world's idols. In that refusal, one regains the authority that purity brings. The third door is the watchman's fast, a fast not of food, but of time. It is the discipline of wakefulness, the offering of the night's silence as a vigil of intercession. While the world sleeps, the watchman keeps his post. He fasts from comfort, from rest, from the ease of slumber, choosing instead to keep the spiritual gates of his life guarded. There is a power in such watchfulness. The night has always been a favored hour of the adversary, when distraction is minimal and thoughts run unguarded. Yet it is also the hour of revelation. Those who practice the watchman's fast learn that prayer in darkness is sharper than any sword in daylight. They stand between what threatens and what is sacred, offering their wakefulness as a shield. Every moment of lost sleep becomes a seed of authority, for the soul that has learned to master time can master temptation. And then there is the fourth and final door, the hidden fast, the crown of all fasting. It is done without announcement, without admiration, without the faintest trace of pride. It hides itself beneath ordinary life, secret and sacred. The hidden fast may be unseen by man, but it is fully known by heaven. It is the fast of pure motive, the offering that seeks no witness. In this silence of secrecy, the soul becomes a temple without walls. What is done in hiddenness becomes invincible, for no demon can attack what it cannot detect. Pride and vanity, those ancient parasites of virtue, have no foothold here. The hidden fast burns with quiet fire, and in its warmth, humility is born. Each of these four fasts addresses a different chain that binds the human heart. The abstinence fast breaks dependency, teaching that self-control is the foundation of strength. The Daniel fast purges corruption, calling the body and mind back into sacred order. The watchman's fast restores vigilance, awakening the soul to spiritual realities that slumber has hidden. And the hidden fast uproots pride, making obedience the only true offering. Together, they form a complete pattern of deliverance, a strategy of divine discipline that dismantles the fortress of darkness from the inside out. The one who walks through these doors discovers that fasting is not about deprivation, but transformation. Each method reshapes the inner life, layer by layer, until the soul becomes transparent, unclouded by desire or distraction. These are not rituals of despair, but exercises in dominion. They are doors not of escape, but of entrance into the strength that cannot be shaken, the clarity that cannot be deceived, and the purity that no darkness can withstand. The unmasking of demons fasting exposes what hides beneath comfort. It burns away disguises of pride, fear, and addiction. There are powers that prefer the shadows, forces that thrive not in darkness itself, but in the dim light where truth is blurred and conscience is numbed. These are the subtle demons of the inner life, pride that disguises itself as confidence, fear that pretends to be caution, an addiction that masquerades as harmless routine. They are not always violent invaders. Often they are polite guests, long entertained by the soul's hospitality. They live in comfort, fed daily by indulgence and silence. But fasting, like a torch in a sealed chamber, exposes them. It strips away their disguises and forces them into the open. Comfort is a double-edged blessing. It soothes the body, but it can also anesthetize the soul. It is in ease that spiritual decay often begins. When all is convenient, the conscience grows sleepy, and what should alarm us becomes ordinary. Fasting interrupts this slumber. It removes the cushions and compels the spirit to wake. In hunger, the illusions that once felt solid begin to crack. The soul sees what it has avoided seeing, hears what it has long refused to hear. The mask of composure falls, and beneath it, the old tyrants of pride, fear, and addiction reveal themselves. Pride is the first to resist exposure. It is clever and refined, always hiding behind virtues. It says, "I am disciplined," when it is merely self-admiring. It says, "I am wise," when it is merely unwilling to be corrected. Pride feeds on accomplishment, on attention, even on spiritual progress itself. But fasting denies it its favorite meal, recognition. When one fasts sincerely, no audience applauds. The discipline is quiet, unseen, often misunderstood. Pride starves in that silence. The fast becomes a mirror, and in that mirror, pride must face its true reflection. A fragile creature desperate for applause. The exposure is painful, but it is holy pain, for only what is revealed can be healed. Fear is subtler still. It hides beneath logic and self-protection, whispering that caution is wisdom and retreat is prudence. Yet fear, when unmasked, is nothing more than mistrust in disguise, a lack of faith that the unseen hand truly holds the future. Fasting tears away its justifications. When the body trembles in weakness, when hunger gnaws and control seems lost, fear rises like a storm. But that is precisely the moment of revelation. The fast shows what the heart truly believes about provision, safety, and sovereignty. It asks, whom do you trust when you cannot feed yourself? In that question, fear loses its camouflage. What once hid behind careful reasoning stands revealed as doubt. And in that unveiling, the soul is given a choice, to flee back into comfort or to stand still and believe. Addiction is the most deceptive of all. It does not always appear as vice. It can wear the face of routine, productivity, even piety. It whispers, "You need this to function," and the soul obeys, not realizing it has built a small altar to dependence. Fasting is the great interruption, the holy inconvenience that exposes every false necessity. When one abstains from food, entertainment, or habit, the body begins to protest, but beneath that protest, the truth surfaces. How easily we have become slaves to patterns that promise relief but deliver chains. The fast reveals not only the presence of addiction, but also its power, its persistence, its subtle hold on thought and mood. And once seen, it cannot remain disguised. This unmasking is not gentle work. It is surgical, stripping layer after layer until the soul stands bare before its maker. The fast burns away comfort's illusions the way fire refines metal painfully, yet with purpose. Each pang of hunger, each denied indulgence, becomes a flame-consuming falsehood. And in the glow of that flame, the inner shadows flee, for demons cannot endure exposure. Their strength lies in secrecy. The moment they are named, they begin to weaken. There is something terrifying yet liberating about such revelation. When the soul sees the truth of itself, it loses the ability to pretend. The excuses that once justified sin collapse. Pride no longer feels noble, fear no longer feels wise, addiction no longer feels necessary. all stand unveiled, trembling under the light of truth. And though the sight may bring sorrow, it is the beginning of purification. The fast does not create these demons, it simply removes the fog that hid them. It teaches the soul that darkness survives only where comfort protects it. Through fasting, the believer learns to stop negotiating with hidden bondage. What once seemed harmless now appears for what it is, a subtle enemy of freedom. Each unmasked spirit loses its grip, not through force, but through exposure. In the sacred simplicity of hunger and quiet, the masks fall, and the soul, naked but honest, begins to remember what it was always meant to be. The authority of emptiness, when offered to heaven, becomes a weapon sharper than hunger itself. There is a mystery hidden in the act of surrender, a paradox that the world cannot comprehend. Emptiness in every natural sense suggests loss, lack, weakness, yet in the spiritual realm, emptiness willingly embraced becomes authority. The man who chooses to empty himself of indulgence, of noise, of self-importance, becomes the most dangerous kind of soul, one whom heaven can fill. This is the sacred alchemy of fasting. It takes what appears to be nothing and turns it into power. It transforms hunger into a declaration, silence into strength, and lack into abundance of grace. Every human heart is a vessel, but few remain aware of what fills them. Most are crowded with anxieties, ambitions, memories, and the constant residue of striving. The vessel overflows, yet with things that do not satisfy. Fasting is the deliberate act of pouring all that out. It is saying, I will be empty until heaven decides to fill me. This emptiness is not despair, but invitation. It is a throne prepared for presence. The soul that dares to become empty declares its trust that God will not leave it void. And that trust itself becomes power over fear, over desire, over the demonic forces that feed on excess and noise. There is a particular authority that rises in those who have learned to live without constant filling. The one who can endure emptiness without panic, who can face hunger without resentment, who can stand in silence without distraction, has become untouchable by the ordinary weapons of temptation. Demons traffic in immediacy, they rely on the urgency of appetite, the tyranny of the now. But fasting teaches patience, and patience dismantles their strategies. Emptiness held in faith breaks their rhythm. It denies them the quick reaction they seek. It teaches the soul to wait, to breathe, to rest in dependence rather than in demand. In this way, emptiness becomes a kind of throne. It is the seat of authority precisely because it refuses to enthrone the self. When the self is diminished, when the ego's voice grows faint, divine strength takes its place. The one who fasts becomes transparent, no longer cluttered with personal agendas, no longer enslaved to approval or fear. Through that transparency, divine power flows unhindered. Authority is not seized by effort. It is received in surrender. The fasting soul learns that mastery begins not in fullness but in vacancy. It is the cleared space that allows heaven to move freely. To the outside world, such emptiness seems pitiful. Hunger appears as weakness, restraint looks like loss. Yet within the soul, something entirely opposite occurs. The will grows sharp, the senses awaken, the spirit becomes luminous. What the flesh calls deprivation, the spirit recognizes as preparation. For emptiness is not a void to be feared. It is the chamber where revelation is born. Every prophet, every saint, every reformer of the spirit has known this truth, that the word comes not to the crowded mind, but to the wilderness of emptiness. When the noise of self is silenced, the voice of heaven can finally be heard. This emptiness is not passive. It is a chosen stillness, a disciplined vacancy that demands courage. To fast is to confront the panic of need and refuse to bow to it. It is to stare at hunger, physical or spiritual, and declare that it will not define you. There is immense authority in that defiance. The demons that once manipulated emotion and appetite find no entrance where emptiness stands guard. The soul that has learned to hunger without despair cannot be controlled by what it lacks. It becomes, instead, a vessel of quiet dominion. Emptiness also refines perception. When one is full of the world, discernment dulls, everything feels heavy, clouded. But when the fast has drained away excess, sight becomes clear. Truth shines in sharp relief, and the soul can distinguish between what nourishes and what deceives. This is the authority of clarity, the wisdom that cannot be manipulated. A fasting heart recognizes false comfort instantly. It knows when pleasure is poison and when pain is purification. The very act of emptiness sharpens the senses of the spirit, making it both humble and dangerous. There is an ancient strength in those who live by this principle. They are not swayed by abundance nor broken by lack. They have discovered that emptiness is not the end of possession, but the beginning of stewardship. What they hold lightly. What they lose without fear. This composure is unbearable to the demonic order, which thrives on chaos and attachment. The fasting soul's emptiness becomes a fortress, not a void, a place where dependence on the divine is complete, and where no enemy can plant deceit. Emptiness, therefore, is not a wound to be healed, but a weapon to be wielded. When offered to heaven, it ceases to be absence and becomes presence in its purest form. It is the space where humility gives birth to strength, where weakness becomes authority, and where silence thunders louder than any prayer of demand. The soul emptied of self becomes the vessel of divine command, and its very stillness terrifies what once sought to enslave it. The return of light, when fasting is done in truth, darkness loses its claim, and it cannot return to what has been illuminated. There is a sacred finality to true transformation, a moment when the soul, once captive, becomes untouchable. It is not a matter of emotion or ritual, but of illumination, when light returns to places that once belonged to shadow. Fasting, when done in truth and humility, is one of the purest conduits for that return. It does not merely restrain appetite or test endurance. It invites light into hidden regions of the spirit. And once that light enters, the darkness that once made its home there loses all right to remain. It cannot thrive in exposure. It cannot rebuild where revelation has taken root. The return of light is both victory and unveiling. It is the moment when the soul becomes a territory reclaimed. In the beginning, darkness does not flee easily. It is patient, persistent, and subtle. It hides behind fatigue, behind irritation, behind every whisper that says, "This is useless." But the one who continues fasting in sincerity soon discovers that the darkness is not infinite. It is fragile. Its strength lies only in concealment. Fasting is the slow, steady pulling back of the curtain. Each hour of hunger becomes a ray of light. Each act of surrender a window opening toward clarity. The soul that endures learns that revelation is not sudden brightness, but dawn, the gradual dissolving of night, until it can no longer pretend to rule. When light returns through fasting, it does more than reveal, it heals. It seeps into the fractures of the inner life, into wounds long disguised by indulgence or distraction. The light does not argue, it simply shines, and in its shining, decay is undone. The fears that once dictated behavior lose their grip. The memories that once chained the heart to bitterness grow weightless. The compulsions that seemed inescapable begin to crumble. This is not magic, but restoration, for light is not content to visit. It transforms the structure of what it touches. The fasting soul becomes translucent, no longer opaque with pride or cluttered with confusion. There is something profoundly irreversible about this illumination. Once a soul has seen the truth about itself, it cannot unsee it. Once it has tasted the purity of divine presence, the counterfeit pleasures of darkness lose their flavor. The demons that once tempted it find no entrance because the locks have been changed. The architecture of the soul has been rebuilt in light. Temptation may knock, but recognition stands guard. The fasting person no longer mistakes shadow for substance, hunger for emptiness, or noise for meaning. The fast rewrites the senses, teaching the heart to discern light not merely as brightness, but as reality itself. This return of light is not only personal, it is contagious. The illuminated soul becomes a lamp in its own sphere, a presence that alters the atmosphere around it. Others may not understand why they feel peace in its company, why conversations near it drift toward honesty, why anxiety lessens where it dwells. It is because light does not stay contained. It radiates quietly, steadily, without performance. The fasting soul, purified of self, becomes a vessel through which the world begins to heal. Its silence speaks, its restraint blesses, and its emptiness overflows. Such souls are rare because they have passed through the discipline of divine hunger. They have allowed light to do what comfort never could, cleanse without cruelty, strengthen without pride, and sanctify without spectacle. Darkness, in contrast, cannot return where the light abides fully. It depends on secrecy, on negligence, on the dulling of awareness. The fast restores vigilance. It teaches the spirit to notice even the smallest shadow before it grows. Every moment of mindfulness becomes a spark that keeps the chamber bright. The soul learns to guard what it has regained, not through fear, but through devotion. The light does not demand vigilance out of paranoia, but out of gratitude. Once the fast has lifted the veil and the heart has seen the beauty of truth unobscured, it cannot bear to invite shadow back. Light, once welcomed, becomes the new rhythm of life. It infuses ordinary actions with significance, transforming eating into gratitude, speech into blessing, rest into worship. The mundane becomes radiant because it is lived in awareness. The fasting soul understands that illumination is not a singular event, but a continual posture, a life lived turned toward the source. This is the quiet glory of true fasting. It makes permanence possible. What was once a battle becomes a state of being where light reigns not as a guest, but as a ruler. The return of light, then, is the soul's awakening to its original design. It is the undoing of separation, the end of spiritual exile. Through fasting, the heart remembers its native brightness, the image it was always meant to reflect. The darkness may circle, may whisper, may wait, but it cannot enter a place already ablaze. For when fasting is done in truth, the soul's horizon changes forever. The dawn has come, and the night knows it has lost its claim. Fasting is not merely a denial of the flesh, it is the unveiling of the spirit. Through hunger, silence, discipline, and surrender, the soul remembers what it truly is, a vessel of divine strength forged for dominion over darkness. Each method, the abstinence fast, the Daniel fast, the watchman's fast, and the hidden fast, forms a step in the sacred ascent from captivity to clarity. Together they do not weaken the body, they awaken the will. The demons that once whispered through appetite and fear find no home in a soul that has learned to hunger rightly. Fasting cleanses the inner temple, replacing noise with peace, pride with humility, and dependence with freedom. It reveals that the true power of man lies not in his fullness, but in his emptiness offered to heaven. When light returns to such a soul, it does not flicker, it reigns. The house once haunted becomes a sanctuary. The appetites that ruled become servants. The silence once feared becomes a throne of communion. For the one who fasts in truth has not merely resisted darkness, he has expelled it. He has turned his hunger into a weapon, his weakness into wisdom, his emptiness into authority. And when the demons look again for the door they once entered, they will find it sealed by light, guarded by vigilance, and filled with glory. For the fasting soul has learned the great secret, that nothing of darkness can remain where the Spirit has chosen to shine.